On today's episode of Velcro Love, we are so lucky to have the emotionally focused therapy trainer, supervisor, and therapist, Ryan Rana, Dr. Ryan Rana from Tennessee, who's going to talk to us about emotional attunement and emotional bonding. Stay tuned. It's going to be great.
Welcome to Velcro Love, a podcast about attachment theory, relationships, therapy, love, and sex. Our content is based on the groundbreaking work of Dr. Sue Johnson, the founder of Emotionally Focused Therapy. Your host is Ed Peterson, licensed psychotherapist and certified supervisor in emotionally focused therapy. Our goal is to share the healing power of attachment theory and emotional regulation with as many people as possible, and to have fun along the way.
Here's a little bit about Ryan Rana. He's the co-founder of the Joshua Center in Tennessee, and he specializes in working with couples, trauma, sexual issues, and various other outpatient areas. He enjoys working with military and first responder members and/or couples. He also spends significant time studying military training and practice and how it relates to the strategies of counseling. In addition to these roles, Ryan spends a lot of time providing training opportunities and supervision locally and abroad. He is a trainer in emotionally focused therapy and is the founder of the Arkansas EFT Center. And before becoming a therapist, Ryan was a collegiate athlete and eventually an athlete pitching coach at the collegiate level of baseball. We are so lucky to have Ryan with us. And this idea of attunement jumps out at me as one of the sort of most basic ideas. And so I wonder if we could just start out and I could ask you a little bit about, especially in your work and your perspective on working with couples and individuals, why is this thing called attunement or emotional attunement? Why is it important? And what is it to you? How would you describe it?
It is really important, and I'll do two qualifiers first. Number one, I would not consider myself the final word on this topic by any means. I'm a work in progress, just like everyone else. And I can go on my platforms and talk about this stuff and go back to my house and mess it up in my own relationships. And I have done that plenty of times. So I just want to say that first. The second qualifier, I love this topic, Ed. It's interesting that you picked this one. Because the most honest answer is I don't know for sure. And I'll tell you why. This idea of attunement is so important and so deep, it's hard to quantify. In fact, I'm not even sure the limits of our language allow us to see the depth of this concept. So my first answer is because our most important relationships are sacred. They are spiritual. They touch us, physiologically, spiritually, emotionally. Their level of importance that goes well beyond skill building. And, that's one of the, I think, a little bit of a double-edged sword is we have so much information in our culture about relationships, so many theories, so many books trying to reduce this concept. And I think sometimes we miss going towards skills and communication, as if you can just reshape a sentence or two and establish this deep connection with these people that mean so much, when really this is a heart level thing. And so that's where I think attunement comes in. It's just so sacred and it's almost unspeakable. It's a little bit like trying to describe how two people dance well together. And you can come up with some adjectives, but there's just something that's a bit spiritual about it. There's a movement, there's a rhythm that's intuitive, it's felt. There's a sense of presence and a sense of letting go at the same time, right? I'm not a big dancer, but I have a buddy who is, and I remember asking him one time, what makes you a great dancer? He says, you have to quit trying so hard and you have to let the music move you. And that's a little bit like emotional attunement in these really deep bonding areas.
Wow, there's a lot of great stuff in that. I really like that idea that, one, this is something that's very important and also something that's hard to describe, right? It almost reminds me of when I look at a beautiful Van Gogh painting or something, and it speaks to me, I feel something. But if I was asked to describe exactly what is this experience, why am I so attracted to this Van Gogh painting? I don't know that I'd have words for it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so let's go back to that image of dancing, because we know, you and I know, that that's a very favorite example or topic of our founder, Dr. Sue Johnson. She's a dancer. She's a tango dancer. And the funny thing about that is I actually went tango dancing for the first time last year. And it wasn't pretty, I'll tell you that.
People our size can hurt
But
people when we're off. Yeah, that's good, Ed.
it's true. But the thing is, as I sat on the side, because this was like a tango dancing group, there were about 30 people in this room. And I was watching these people go around the room together. And, the music was this beautiful sort of South American sort of, the way that I describe it is it was both beautiful and sad at the same time. But just watching these people this and that way, it really does remind me of what you're saying. So maybe you could speak, even though it's hard to describe it. It could be verbally, it could be just in, it happens with people's bodies in body language. But how would you describe emotional attunement if someone didn't even know what that meant? How would you describe it?
Well, I'll take a quick pass at the scientific side of this. I'll try to be brief, but the concept of mirror neurons jumps off the page to me when I teach this regularly. I try to do a 10 or 15-minute teach on mirror neurons. People like that. Sometimes that can be helpful. So, another qualifier, anytime you're talking about the brain, there's going to be an element of speculation. But, Joseph Rizzolatti, an Italian psychologist, years and years ago, early 90s, late 80s, discovered this concept of mirror neurons by studying monkeys and how mammals have microscopic neurons in the brain that are mirroring other mammals. And so then he moved to Pennsylvania, eventually at UCLA with Alan Shore and others. And so Alan Shore describes mirror neurons as being microscopic catcher's mitts that sort of swim around in the brain. And these mirror neurons are always looking for another mammal to be on the same channel as them. So if you think about this like the old radio dials, if my body is on channel 102.3 in distress, whether I actually want to or not, so this goes beyond intention, my body, the mirror neurons, are looking from some other mammal to be on the same channel as me, because only then are we safe. So this goes back to a survival instinct level aspect of the brain.
Right.
If I'm at 102.3 and you come in and we are misattuned, you're at 91.5, right? That my brain registers a pain response. So misattuned emotional channels actually create physiological pain for the brain. So Shore would say when people are misattuned, these mirror neurons kind of have a jerking movement in the brain. That's that pain response. But if I can find a way to get a clear signal out to you, instead of saying, why aren't you here with me? Or instead of saying, I'm fine, both of which are a bit unclear, deceptive, or even a lie. If I can clearly say, hey, I'm having a tough time. Today, my soul hurts, and it hurts at 102.3. And if you have enough, emotional intelligence, enough corrective experiences in your own body, and you can move off your channel onto my channel, we come into attunement. So your body literally is on the same channel as mine. At that point, Shore talks about the mirror neurons moving in a rhythm. Okay. And that's called neurological resonance. And from the place of resonance is when we can take in new things, right? Some people believe that autism, especially the more severe side of autism, is actually a disorder of mirror neurons, right? So that's somewhat speculation, but this neurological resonance comes from education. So a child who enters first grade, who's close and connected with self and other, comes from a resonant place. Therefore, they can take in the alphabet. A kid who leaves home and there's been violence or insecurity or food insecurity, whatever that might be, they come in a non-resonant place. So their brain is locked in survival levels. And so they can't take in the same alphabet. And oftentimes they will seem less intelligent than the kid who comes from a secure resonance, which is a tragedy and a reason that we want to keep growing in areas like social justice and equity and so forth. But that's kind of the way I think of the neurology piece or the physiology piece. Yeah.
So going with that, I just teleported back to my second grade classroom, right? That yeah, I mean, if Johnny next to me woke up, was rested, had a nice breakfast, one parent or two parents were there, gave him a hug and a kiss, and he felt loved, safe, trusting with these adults. And then he gets to school, he's not late, he sits down at his desk, maybe the teacher right before class comes up and says, "Hi, Johnny," and smiles at him, right? I think what you're saying is that almost physiologically, neurologically, he is in an open place. Whereas if I come in, right, and like you said, I'm 10 minutes late, my mother or my father's been yelling at me, or they've been yelling at each other, it makes me think that part of it would be that I would be walking into that classroom and I would almost be looking for threats, right? I would be seeing my teacher and seeing other people, and the kid might not even know it. But would that be part of it, is that my brain might be just more on edge, looking for potential evidence of the same kind of stuff that I was dealing with at home?
I think so. And I think if you go back to the first scenario with, I think you said, Johnny, when all those beautiful things happen, using Bowlby's language here, the attachment system is satisfied, because attachment is often misunderstood. Attachment is about threat mitigation. We like to talk about attachment like this beautiful thing, but attachment is actually a distress system in the brain, according to Bowlby. So, but when Johnny has all these beautiful moments, a hug from both parents, or, a smile from the teacher, a nice breakfast, so that his attachment system is satisfied. So that Bowlby would say it opens up his exploratory system. So all of a sudden he's naturally flexible, which means he can mind the teacher, which makes him more popular. Right? Which makes him curious. And curiosity is such a huge part of humanity, of healthy human living and relationships and learning. I have to have the curious portion of my brain online to take in new information. Whereas this second scenario, this child of less fortune who has these danger cues all around him, he's staying on his attachment system, meaning I can't really do anything else until my survival is proven, right? I stay on edge. I stay in an upregulated state. And people, that's my definition of mental illness, actually, is people who stay in that state way too long, right? That state in our brain is designed, it's a good thing. It's designed to be there when the bear is attacking us. It's not designed to be a regular part of life. This is not designed to be how we walk around, in first grade and otherwise. So yeah, I think so. Looking for threats, staying in survival mode, prolonged upregulation, exhausting to the body, are going to contribute to things like clinical anxiety, depression, and certainly cannot allow intimacy either. So it's almost a guarantee of isolation. So yeah, it goes a long way with that concept.
I'm just thinking, as as our listeners are listening to us, there may be people with a lot of clinical or psychological training. There may be a lot of people who don't really know about these concepts or these topics. And that's one of the reasons I'm excited about this podcast. I'm hoping this will help bring some of these concepts like you're talking about to a wider audience. But I'll just give you an example of something that happened to me this morning, Ryan, and maybe you could interpret it from the science, exactly what you just talked about, right? Because I think what I'm going to describe here is something that a lot of people might relate to. Okay. So yesterday I did a different podcast interview with a wonderful EFT therapist, named Lori Watson. But what happened is in the first 5 minutes, I turned on my computer and suddenly the technology didn't work. I couldn't hear her. She couldn't hear me. The Wi-Fi dropped, right? And so literally I went from at the beginning of that session feeling open and excited and feeling anticipation to dropping into a whole lot of fear about what's happening here. What is she going to think of me? Is this going to go well? All those almost like catastrophizing thoughts, right? And so skip to this morning when I was getting ready to jump on here with you. I felt a combination of excitement, but also a little bit of fear because of the experience of yesterday, right? Because this is important to me. And I thought to myself, wow, how's this going to go? I hope this goes well. And if I'm honest, am I going to sound as eloquent as my wonderful guest, Ryan, all those things. And I think that it dropped me into a little bit of a stage of anxiety even before we jumped on. And I noticed that in the first 10 seconds of us talking, you smiled, saw your teeth, your face, and you smiled. And I could feel that my neurological system just calmed down. Now, could you maybe speak to that example? Because I think that's what we're talking about, is that there was something going on in me that was perhaps blocking this kind of attunement, but then it has gotten back into tune.
I think you said it perfectly. Doesn't need a lot of explanation. I think that's right on. You were, first of all, your longings were, you want to do a good thing. You want to make a good podcast. And then, you kind of had a mini trauma yesterday with Lori, and the body upregulates because that's a danger, right? Everything from any number of fears, what someone would think of you, or failure, or humiliation. And so your body does what it's supposed to do, which is to upregulate you, to say something's wrong, something's wrong, something's wrong. And then thankfully we got off to a good start. And, being a mammal, you're looking for my signals, and that down regulates your body. I think it's really a perfect description. What stands out to me about that, Ed, is tragic, right? So this is where we have to be so careful with our system of categorizing things and pathologizing behaviors and even people. Is, if someone just took a 3-minute excerpt of looking at you right after the technology failed, they might come up with any number of terms to describe you and miss the context for which it makes sense. Right. And I think what that's really a huge problem in mental health is, I believe, this is my bias coming through pretty strong, that human behavior is adaptive above anything else. And so even outside of our awareness, our brains are always trying to adapt. So then we get into adaptation and maladaptation. And so that's what I think about when you use that example, but I think it's a great illustration of exactly what we're trying to say. So, even as you saw my smile, in your description right there, that attunement between us starts to change your body. And I think it's important to realize the impact we have on others, whether you're a therapist or whether you're a mom of someone or just a friend. Your presence, even your nonverbal presence, changes the inside of other people's bodies. It's a pretty powerful thought.
Right. That is powerful thought, that just my presence, body language, even before anything is spoken, and then of course when words are spoken, is going to have a actual physiological effect, and there will be a response in the other person's body or nervous system just by how they see me, right?
Right. Absolutely.
So see if you could go back to something you just said about the fact that human behavior is adaptive. The reason I want to ask you about that is that in my work as a couples therapist, and I would even say in my work as a father and a husband, and I've got a couple of teenage boys. Well, I'll go to the example with the teenage boys first, because this might help situations with our listeners who have kids. You see, a lot of times, Ryan, I find myself clearly out of attunement with my 15-year-old son. And the way that I know that I'm out of attunement with him is I might walk in after work or he's at home, and my first question for him is, "Hey, how are you doing?" And he's like, "Fine." And then I start pressing, "Well, tell me about something that happened at school. Tell me about this girl that you told me that you were interested in." And I'll just see him just kind of, he'll look away, I'll just get kind of one of these like he just, and clearly it comes because I don't know what's happening, but I'm pressing, I'm asking questions. And, he and I have talked about this, and he said that sometimes, Dad, it feels like you're interrogating me, right? And the opposite sometimes is, especially in the evening, before my son goes to bed, if I just go down to his room and just plop down and lie down on his bed next to him, I don't even have to ask any questions. We just start talking about whatever it is, might be the latest video game. And suddenly he starts talking, and suddenly there's this connection, right? But would you say that that is a good example of a way that I was misattuned to my son in the first example, and then somehow we were able to come in attunement in the second one?
Yeah, I mean, I love those examples. I think in the second one, being in their world is a pretty, it's not a perfect definition of attunement, but it gets pretty close. And I was working with someone overseas several years ago, and she was a therapist, and we were talking about professional things, and she said, "Can I ask you a personal thing?" And she's like, my spouse, my partner is really, really in a bad place, and they are in a place where they're kind of feeling sorry for themselves. Could you just give me a straightforward piece of advice? I'm like, yeah, dive in there with them. Right? That's my number one rule. Don't ever leave someone you love in pain alone. Just don't do it. I don't care if it's justified or if it makes sense or if they're feeling so. Just don't leave people alone in pain. And so many problems that plague us with humanity could be solved by that. I'm not saying it's always that simple. There are complicating factors, but it's a pretty good rule of thumb. Most relationships start to die when people are left alone in pain. And so in that second example, when you lay down next to your son and you're just with him without an agenda, the mirror neuron process starts to happen organically. Whereas the first example, when you come in with an agenda, you can inadvertently put people in a withdrawing stance or defensive stance. But I will say this, you're not supposed to be in attunement with other people all the time. That's a myth. It doesn't work like that. And first of all, you won't be able to anyway. So there's no sense in feeling guilty about it. I mean, the definition of a secure bond is to be connected with someone to experience a rupture. And then the most important word in all of this conversation is, can we repair? So especially with teenagers, ruptures are everywhere. They are going through developmental processes of trying to figure out who they are in the world. Peers become huge figures. Parents sort of shrink, and that's their bodies trying to find a rhythm of, and all that's appropriate. So, but that does push parents to the edge of our security. Can we be patient? Can we spend the time to, just what you did, be in their world without agendas? And then most importantly, repair. after we experience rupture. So I think those are great illustrations, Ed.
Wow, that's so good. That is so good. And that really speaks to my heart as you say those things, Ryan. I can feel, I guess I feel a sense of hope, not just for me and my family, and my son, but this sense of hope that even, people today who are listening to us, maybe they're in a relationship where there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of misattunement. People are either depressed or anxious, and people are trying to make sense of their relationships. And something you said is really is beautiful and kind of haunting, and that is one, that we're not always going to be attuned to each other, but that the advice that you would give to someone who's trying to figure out how to connect with their partner, especially if that partner is in some kind of pain, is your phrase, which is dive in with them. Dive in with them. So let's talk about that, about what maybe you could give an example. I'll just throw in there maybe a typical couple that has sort of a pursue withdraw relationship where one person can get very critical and come forward and want to solve everything now and has a lot of energy and maybe has certain fears around being abandoned. And the other partner, even though they may deeply love their partner and they may be very important to them, just tends to, when things get hot, when there's conflict, they withdraw, right? Their adaptive move is to withdraw, right? And so if I were that couple, let's say I came up to you and you were giving a speech, and my question was, Ryan, my partner is depressed, and when he's depressed, he shuts down, he doesn't talk to me at all, and I come home and it's all a bunch of one-word answers, and then if I press it and ask more, he gets angry, and so I don't know what to do because I love him. It's just an example, probably a same-sex couple. I love him, but I don't know what to do because it seems like everything that I try to do pushes him away. So you mentioned something about attunement, Mr. Rana. What can you give me some advice here?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't give advice there. That would be a bit dangerous then and now. But I would say, kind of depending on what what that person's asking me, I would try to talk about, right back to adaptation, that both people have to find a way to make adaptation, and it's not about blame or responsibility, putting on one or the other, but typically a partner who gives one-word answers is in a relationship with a partner who gives 1,000-word responses, and they feed each other, right? And so both parties have got to make adaptations, right? And so the person who has a lot of words oftentimes doesn't often have a lot of access to their actual heart. They have a lot of energy. That's not the same as sort of the vulnerable description of their inner world, right? And so working from that front, and then the person who's going through depression, it would depend on what they say, but I really believe that depression is very adaptive. I find most of the time that when someone's in one of those windows, their body's really trying to grieve something that's hurt. And it's really sucking the energy out of their body. So I would love if that person could come forward just a little with some curiosity, just like Johnny in first grade we talked about 15 minutes ago. And what are the good reasons you have to be sad? And can we look at the loss of vision in your life, or the loss of a parent, whatever might be going on? And then can I find a way to get both of you into that pain together? Because here's what I know for sure. Humans bond with what is painful, and humans really bond with places of comfort that they get in the pain. And so that's what breaks my heart, is so much of the conversation on relationships is quick fixy and techniquey, as opposed to let's get in this together. And so I've never met someone in my career of 25 years. I've worked in 5 mental health facilities, like psychiatric or rehab facilities, and years of private practice. I've never met a depressed person that didn't have good reasons. Oftentimes, initially, they say I'm depressed for no reason. There's no reason, but it doesn't take 2 or 3 sessions to go, you have tons of good reasons. Your body's mourning. Your body's burning up all your energy, trying to grieve, trying to work through something you've been through. So I wouldn't try to give advice in like a simple 1, 2, 3, do it this way. I would try to see if we can get both people to shift a little bit so they can get in pain together and they can comfort one another. Because again, whatever a human uses to bring about comfort, you're going to bond with, whether that's a good cigar, a glass of whiskey, exercise, or the most significant person in your life. It's a great inventory to take for all of us, is like, hey, where do I get comfort exactly? Is it Netflix? Because wherever I'm getting comfort is where I'm going to really, really bond. So it's a great thing to be intentional about. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what comes to my mind.
No, you absolutely did. And I'll give you a quick example to take that a little bit further. That jumps out at me. When I was in my 20s, I struggled with a lot of major depression. And that's one of the reasons that I became a therapist, was over the years kind of unraveling that and figuring it out. And one of the things that happened to me, Ryan, is I had a very successful, very high profile father. I knew he loved me, but he was very much a doer. It was always about fixing and doing things, right? And I remember a time when I was struggling with depression, but for me, it was a lot about that kind of failure to launch. Am I meeting the expectations? What am I going to do with my life? And I also had quite a significant stutter, right? And so I felt blocked quite a bit. And that was part of the depression. Well, you see, there were 2 different things that would happen. This is an example, I think, of attunement, is that my dad, bless his heart, he's been gone for 8 years. If he's listening to this, Dad, I love you. But he would come in my room in the morning and he would say, okay, let's do this. Let's go to the gym together right now, and we'll go and swim. Because I read this article about depression, that if you will swim for 20 minutes and get your heart rate up, you're going to feel a lot better. My dad was a doctor, right? And then let's go do this and let's do that. And I remember just thinking to myself, Dad, that's I might think it or I might say it, that's the last thing I want to do. My body just wants to go back to sleep. And I know that you're right? But there was a resistance there, because I felt like he was somehow telling me that, I don't know, he didn't want me to be depressed. And so it was all about this, let's get up and do these things, right? And clearly that kind of went clunk for me. I didn't feel closer to him. I actually felt a little more shame that I couldn't get out of this depression, right? But then there was another friend, Ryan, a friend who would just come over and he would just sit with me. And this friend of mine, he didn't have any solutions. He would say things to me like, if you're in pain, I'm in pain. I love you, man. Do you want to maybe do this? We could sit here. Yeah, we could have a cigar. We could go for a drink, or we could do nothing. I just want to hang out with you, let you know that I love you. And you see, and that landed for some reason in my state of feeling depressed. That friend connected with me in a way that my dad didn't. And I did feel more safety with that friend. So maybe you could speak to that. I mean, what exactly is happening there? Because my dad had good intentions, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you said it perfectly. It's connecting all the conversations, just like the misattuned conversations that you and I have with our own sons. The intention is there. The good intention is there. If he comes to your room and is trying to get you to swim to help your depression, that's a wonderful intention. It's just misattuned, which, something we talk about a lot in my office is intentions don't convey in negative cycles of relationship, unfortunately. So you can have the best intentions of the world, but if we can't get to the same channel on the radio dial, the body registers that as a painful response, right? So even our very well-intended efforts can actually create pain in relationships. And in fact, they do, and that friend, and man, it's hard to put a price tag on what that person was in your life. You owe him a thank you note, and or more. And because, again, he came in and was just curious with you, didn't have an agenda. I accept you as you are. And that really opens our brain up for something new. And that's your first step out of hopelessness and heaviness towards the possibility of something being worth believing in or worth hoping in. And again, those relationships are priceless. I think there's parts of us that really can't stay alive without that in our world. And so people get concerned when I say things like that and start going, so is that, codependency or something? And I'm like, no, that's a wonderful thing. And because codependency is actually more like what was going on with your dad a little bit, even though the intentions were there, it's stuck in this ruminating anxiousness, right? And so codependency or ineffective dependency actually is a lack of depth.
Right.
It's not about having more boundaries and so forth. So anyway, I'm on a tangent a bit there, but that other person entered your world in an attuned way, and your brain responds to that, and it shifts things, and that's the, that first step towards it being different.
Well, you see, and as you're saying that, I just thought to myself, again, I kind of teleported back. And if I was honest, like if my body in that moment, right, when my dad walked in the room and I'm still in bed, if my body was really doing what it would want to do, it literally would hear him talking and I would want to roll over. I'd want to roll over in bed and just put the covers over my head. Right. Versus my friend was there, and if he just sat down and started talking to me, I might even perk up a little bit. But I think part of it might be that I would be picking up on my dad's anxiety, that he was suffering because I was suffering.
Yeah.
But you see, what he couldn't do in that moment goes back to something you said, which is that I don't think in that moment he was really speaking his heart, right? Because wouldn't you say that if you were more honest, he would be telling me how hard it was, how much pain he was in because he loved me, and maybe talking about feeling powerless to help me? So maybe you could speak to that. I mean, what's the difference between a father coming in and kind of being like a loving drill sergeant, do this, do that, versus maybe, to your phrase, what would it look like if my dad took a dive in it with me?
Right. No, I mean, there's research that was done on marriage and family therapists, which I am one of those, and well, it was true for me because I practiced as an MFT, marriage and family, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 years before I had kids. And before I was a parent, I was a lot harder on parents, right? And then I became one day, and I realized, this is not as simple as it looks from the outside. It's one thing to know these concepts; it's another to be able to do them. And so I don't want to be too hard on dads. It's harder than it looks. I'll tell you that. Because for dad to get all the way in there with you, he may had to walk over 10 piles of clothes that you didn't do what you were told to do, and a dirty bathroom, and being rude to your brother, whatever, any number of things to even get in there. And then not only that, going back generations, if he didn't have someone who was showing up in his world, his repertoire of how to show up in yours is very undeveloped, right? So it's like asking him to speak Spanish without any fluency, right? And then you're putting out signals inadvertently, which kind of say, leave me alone. So it's a whole lot to ask, so it makes sense that family relationships with great intentions can still go really sideways. But in fairness, one more fairness to your dad, your friend didn't have to worry about all that stuff. Right. Your friend didn't feel responsible for you, and your friend hadn't been hurt by you, and your friend doesn't lay up at night worried about your future. which puts him in this flexible position, which works. But it's your dad, ironically, is actually harder in some ways to show up than a buddy.
Yeah.
And I think most of us, with good intentions, show up with the strategy that's worked in our world, expecting it to work in someone else's. Right. So my guess is that your dad's inner world, what got him out of bed, what drove him to get through medical school, what was that sort of anxious, learning to push, learning to be mentally tough, and which there's a lot of wisdom in that, actually,
Right.
but it's not always attuned, and because attunement is also about order. It's also about order, right? There's the start with all the forms of connection before the brain can take in correction. Right. And so if my only strategy is a push strategy, it's going to put me out of order with people who are in pain, right? Which is then baffling because it doesn't work and often makes it worse. So that'd be my little feedback on that interaction.
Right. And so I love that. And before we quit here, we just got a couple more minutes. I wanted to ask you to just role play one thing for me, because it just jumped into my head. This is something that might happen with me and my therapist. But if we go back to that example, right? And let's say you were doing individual therapy with my dad, right? And he came in and he was saying, I'll just be him, like, yeah, I don't know what to do. My son's so depressed, and I've tried this, and I've been reading these articles, Ryan, and I try to get him to get out of bed and he won't do it. And I try to get him to exercise. And I just don't know what I'm so frustrated, right? As a therapist, not that we have to go into it deeply here, but what would your curiosity be? Where would you be trying to help me get to? Or, what would your curiosity say to you as a therapist of what you would try to help me do, or the work that is in front of a dad like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think I would want to spend a lot of time validating his frustration and validating even the facts around that exercise does have some effect on depression. Of course, that's just management of the depression. It doesn't actually address the real thing that's going on, but he doesn't know that, nor should he. So I would spend a lot of time validating the frustrating part, because it's hard having a 15-year-old son. It really is. If you haven't done it, it's hard. I'll just tell you, whoever's listening to this. So be careful judging parents, judging anybody, really. Right. So I would spend a lot of time honoring the challenge that he faces. And then I would just want to see if he can make some space with me to say, because what if Ed doesn't come out of this? What if this is his reality? What if Ed does not succeed? How would that land for you?
Right.
I would want to touch his sort of pre-grief, his fears, and I would want to try to organize that, because if I can get him to organize his vulnerable pain and his fears around you, perhaps I can get him to have to show that to you at some point, which would potentially put you in attunement, something like that.
Well, and I think that just as I'm, hearing you say that, I was kind of dropping into the role if I was my dad, just hearing you say that you would spend a lot of time validating how hard this is, and validating that, that what I'm trying to do as a dad, that it makes sense, right? Instead of jumping to give me a bunch of tips about do this or do that, for some reason it feels like, man, it's like my heart gets bigger and I relax as I hear you saying that you would be validating my experience.
Absolutely. The more important the relationship, the less value tips have. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Because it's so heart driven. And the problem in most intimate relationships is the communication is too good, which is why we don't work on communication in my office. I'm kind of being metaphoric there when I say too good, but what's coming across is his incredible anxiety, right? It's just misattuned.
Yeah.
So the problem isn't that he's not using the right communication techniques. The problem is he doesn't have access to what's really going on in his heart. And there's the miss. But I But he can't have access until someone works with his protection system. Because again, he has really good reasons to be upset. It's got to be super hard to look at your son whom you love and see them suffering. And so it's not unnatural to say, let me pull you out of the suffering. That is his effort to love you. And it makes sense. And if I can spend time with that, maybe he can calm that just a hair and we can go a level to see what else is going on there. Because I think that's probably what you need. I mean, it's proof. Actually, we know that's what you need because you had a friend come in and sort of be that surrogate for you. You know, thank God for friends, right?
Well, and I think what you're saying is even in the therapy office, by validating, you would be coming into attunement with your client right there. Because again, the misattunement might be to start giving advice, which actually might cause the client to feel some more shame, like, wow, why can't it sounds so simple the way you say it, Ryan? Why can't I do it? Right. Versus you come into attunement. And so maybe that's our takeaway here, just to end up, and I could ask you this, is that, you know, and again, we're not getting behavioral, we're not telling people what to do with a technique here and there, but maybe you could just speak this last thing about, again, this idea of if you're encouraging people to dive in and be with each other, which is going to lead hopefully to more limbic resonance, more attunement. Maybe just speak to this. Maybe you're encouraging people in difficult situations to keep trying, right? And to keep diving in there, even if they're not doing it perfectly.
Right. Yeah. And I would just start again by saying how difficult that is, especially thinking about, you know, the profile you've painted of your dad, you know, because he literally survives in life by having answers and having solutions.
Right.
You're asking him to set aside the very thing that makes him feel strong and have value in the earth. That's a lot to ask of someone like that. And not only that, it's our culture. Our culture says, if I can't come up with a solution or the 3-step technique, the communication, the love languages, the endless number of these little sort of pop culture solutions, if you don't have that, don't show up. And what I'm suggesting is the opposite. It's a good day to jump in pain with someone and say, I don't know what to say right now, but I got your back.
Yeah.
That is what changes. That is where change begins, those kind of moments.
Oh man, that's so good. I want to say that again. I don't know what to say, but I have your back.
Yep. And I'm here with you.
I'm here with you.
Yep. It's not about technique, man, because you can't fake that technique.
Yeah.
You can teach someone to say that phrase, but if it's not heartfelt, not going to land.
Yeah. You know, and I did that once when I was having one of those unsuccessful conversations with my teenager, and he was giving me the one word answer, and I did think I pulled probably something I've learned from you and others is I just looked at him and I said, you know, God, I love you so much, and it is really frustrating because as you can tell, I'm trying to have a conversation with you, and you know maybe you're not into it right now, but I just want to tell you that you know I love you. And even though maybe I'm not doing this right, I'm here for you. And, you know, and just that kind of, I remember that kind of opened up space. He looked at me and he's like, yeah, thanks, Dad.
Mm-hmm.
So
Beautiful.
listen, Ryan, I want to thank you for being here again. This is Dr. Ryan Rana. You can find him in lots of places. Boy, if you're a therapist, check out Success and Vulnerability. What a wonderful program you and George Fowler and others are doing on that one. Brian, you're in private practice in Arkansas, Fayetteville, right?
Yes.
Yep. And is there any, if people are looking to have you perhaps speak or be involved with you professionally, just want to reach you, Ryan, how can people reach you?
Yeah. Also, if you're a couples therapist, we have a podcast called The Leading Edge in Emotionally Focused Therapy.
Yes.
That comes out every Tuesday. And then I have a website called ryanranatraining.com. So my last name's Rana. So ryanranatraining.com, and you can reach me there, kind of keep up with where I am at that point.
Yeah, and I can tell you, if you are a therapist, I listen to that Leading Edge podcast every week, and it blows my mind, and it's helped me so much. So Ryan, thank you for this time. Thank you for all that you do. And I look forward to doing this again soon.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate you having me. Appreciate your support.
Thank you. Bye.